and welcome. You're watching NewsX Deep Dive with me, Shivani Singh. A year ago today, Air India flight 171 lifted off from Ahmedabad, and 3 seconds later, two fuel switches in its cockpit moved to the cut-off position, starving both the engines of fuel. Half a minute later, the London-bound Boeing 787 Dreamliner crashed into a medical hostel complex, killing 260 people. It was India's deadliest aviation disaster since the 1996 Charkhi-Dadri mid-air collision, the world's deadliest air accident in a decade, and the first crash in which a Dreamliner was destroyed. A year later, the wreckage has been cleared, compensation has been paid, largely. Memorials have been held. But the central question remains unanswered. Why did AI171 crash? And perhaps more importantly, has India moved closer to justice or merely deeper into uncertainty? Today we revisit the entire journey of the investigation, from the international media's pilot blame narrative to the AAIB's preliminary findings, to the growing demands for judicial scrutiny, and the uncomfortable reality that 12 months later, the final report is still not here. A month after the fatal crash, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau released its preliminary findings about the crash. The report revealed something startling. According to recorded flight data, both engine fuel control switches moved from run to cut off shortly after takeoff, leading to a loss of thrust in both the engines. Investigators also recovered cockpit audio in which one pilot appeared to ask why fuel had been cut off, while the other responded that he had not done so. Now, despite a year of forensic analysis involving investigators from India, the US, Boeing, GE Aerospace, and the US National Transportation Safety Board, the central questions remain unanswered. Attention has focused intensely on events that unfolded inside the cockpit. In December 2025, Indian officials traveled to Washington to review evidence recovered from the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder. Investigators have reportedly ruled out mechanical failure and found no evidence of sabotage, leading them to increasingly focus on possible pilot actions. But that conclusion has become the most fiercely contested aspect of the inquiry. The Federation of Indian Pilots has emerged as one of the strongest critics, arguing that authorities have concentrated too heavily on pilot actions while failing to fully explore technical explanations. The pilots' body has questioned the fairness and direction of the investigation, alleging that key evidence is not being followed and lapses in the probe are fueling speculation instead of closure. A day before the one-year mark, the Federation had said that critical questions surrounding the disaster remain unanswered, citing investigative gaps ranging from the delayed examination of the sole survivor to concerns over the handling of technical evidence. The body has even urged the AAIB to refrain from publishing an interim report if investigative questions remain unanswered in order to avoid speculation. The concern can be understood with the pilot blame game that began in May. Foreign media publications. Now, the AAIB preliminary report did not assign blame, neither did it identify a final cause, but its mention of the pilot's conversation without a transcript or any indication of who was speaking sparked intense speculation about the pilot's actions. AAIB issued a statement condemning selective and unverified reporting in the international press as irresponsible, but the damage had already been done. The Wall Street Journal ran a headline that said, "New details in Air India crash probe shift focus to senior pilot." The paper, without further evidence, even went on to claim that it was the captain who turned off the fuel switches. The speculation didn't stop there, and other publications soon picked up the thread. From the New York Post to The Sun, Le Monde, People, Independent and even Reuters all ran headlines, articles, and think pieces alluding to pilot error and citing snippets of a second-hand account of the cockpit conversation with no further context. This obviously triggered outrage across sections of India's aviation community. Pilot associations argued that selective leaks were creating a public narrative before investigators had reached a final conclusion. They even accused unnamed sources of turning an ongoing technical investigation into a trial by media. Many also alleged focus on pilot error to distract from technical or manufacturing issues. The concern was simple. If the final report had not been completed, how could conclusions already be appearing in international headlines? This is perhaps the biggest question today. Why 1 year later are we still waiting? According to recent reports, investigators are still analyzing engine-related evidence, including examinations involving GE Aerospace and international technical teams. The complexity of the inquiry has delayed the publication of a final report by at least 3 months. Under international aviation rules, investigators must publish a final report within a year if possible. When that deadline cannot be met, they should provide an interim statement outlining the progress of the inquiry. So instead of the long-awaited final report, India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau has issued an interim statement saying that the evidence gathered and results of various examinations are currently being analyzed. AAIB has also stated that the sole purpose of an accident investigation is to enhance aviation safety through the identification of lessons and safety recommendations and not to apportion blame or liability. Now, the search for answers has now moved beyond investigators and entered the courts. Petitions seeking independent oversight and further scrutiny of the probe have in fact reached the Supreme Court. The centre has argued that this is an international investigation involving multiple agencies, while the court has indicated it would examine the issue after reviewing the official AAIB findings. This means that even the legal process is effectively waiting for the investigation to conclude, and until that happens, families remain stuck in a painful state of limbo. Meanwhile, a year on, the Federation of Indian Pilots has renewed its demand for a judicial probe into the AI171 crash and urged authorities not to release any interim investigation report, saying it would add to confusion and speculation. Air India says that interim compensation has been paid to 96% of victims' families. Most families have received interim compensation and welfare payments. But compensation was never the primary demand. Families have repeatedly said that they want the truth. Many continue to wait for complete answers. Many still do not know exactly what happened in those final seconds, and many believe that accountability, not compensation, is the true measure of justice. So where do we stand today? 1 year after AI171, we know the engines lost thrust. We know the fuel switches moved to cut off. We know investigators have not issued a final conclusion. We also know that international media reports triggered controversy. We know that pilot organizations are demanding judicial review. We know that families are still waiting, and we know that the final report is still not public. The tragedy of AI171 is no longer just an aviation story. It is now a test of transparency, investigative credibility, and a test of whether India can deliver clear answers after 1 year of the deadliest air disasters in its modern history. 1 year later, the victims have been remembered, the compensation has been distributed, but justice remains incomplete. Because until the final report arrives, the most important question of all remains unanswered. What really brought down Air India flight AI171? Let's discuss this further with Mr. Sanjay Lazar, who's an aviation expert and who's joined us on this broadcast on this solemn 1 year anniversary of this tragic accident. Mr. Nazar, welcome. I want to understand for you, obviously, a lot of unanswered questions, but 1 year on, how are you looking at this investigation? And will the families ever get the answers that we need?
Good evening and thank you for having me on your show, Shivani. We've just in the last few minutes or last hour seen the PIB release of the AAIB statement. I was on your channel a couple of days ago with Uday, and I predicted that at the end of day on the 12th, before the markets in the US open, there would be a status update. And right enough, there was one. Obviously, we are, it's becoming clearer and clearer who's running this dog and pony show. Unfortunately, our AAIB has slipped up so many times from the preliminary report until today. We've only seen missteps and mistakes and nothing more. As someone who's supportive and very involved in the aviation industry in India and supportive of the victims and their families and this tragedy, my heart breaks and goes out to the victims and the family members of the crew, because they're seeing this nonsense repeated in media about the pilot suicide and various sorts of theories that come from the West. Everything designed just to protect the aircraft manufacturer and the engine manufacturer. You're right, and in fact, about the judicial review the FIP asked for, if you go back a year, I had demanded a judicial review within the first 10 days, because in every single prior incident, from Kanishka right down to Indian Airlines Ahmedabad to the cases of Air India Express in Kozhikode, we had a judicial inquiry. Of course, there was no AAIB at that time. However, to have a sitting judge or a retired judge of a high court conducting a judicial inquiry makes a far greater sense, because then you have evidentiary value. Be that as it may, it did not happen. We've now got this. Just to give you an example, the sole surviving witness was only examined by AAIB as late as March. There was no subject matter pilot expert on the panel when the preliminary report was issued, 787 pilot. He was added much later on because ALPA and FIP made a noise, and many other organizations like us made a noise. That pilot has apparently left in January, and we're just getting to know. What on earth is going on? Nobody realizes, nobody understands. And we've got a nation that's grieving and mourning today. We've got an airline full of people who don't know where to go forward, because they want to put this behind them and start rebuilding their lives. There are crew members, there are families of passengers who've died, and we are no closer to the truth. We see leaks in Italian magazines, newspapers, German papers, and Wall Street Journal and others. Everybody seems to know more about our tragedy than we do in India. Or are we being led by somebody else? This is my serious question, and it's been a sham of such shambolic nature I cannot explain. I hope that the government or the Prime Minister looks into this, because our aviation system is in a mess in this country. Whether it's the regulator, DGCA, or whether it's the AAIB, we need to restructure, reconfigure, and make it serious. We are the third largest market in the world.
1 year on, and still no close to the truth. I understand that, Mr. Lazar. I thank you as well for your perspective on this issue. With that, viewers, we're stepping into a short commercial.